Not every bad outcome in a nursing home is abuse, but let's stop pretending that they're all unavoidable either. My hot take this week: when care turns into harm, we hide behind staffing shortages and funding gaps instead of asking who's actually accountable. Yes, ratios matter. Yes, Medicaid reimbursement matters, but so does oversight, leadership, culture, and enforcement. If a system is underfunded and understaffed, harm isn't an accident, it's a predictable outcome. The question isn't, how did this happen? The question is, why do we keep accepting it? When does poor care cross the line into legal harm? And why is accountability inside nursing homes so difficult to enforce? How do staffing ratios, reimbursement structures, and ownership models contribute to preventable harm inside facilities? And what warning signs do families often overlook before serious injury, neglect, or abuse occurs? What should families realistically expect if they pursue legal action? And where does the system make justice harder than it should be? Welcome to the Aging Together podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Pooja A, Patel, a double board certified occupational therapist and gerontologist with additional certifications in dementia and fall prevention. This season, we are unfiltered. In this podcast, I interview guests who are experts in their fields or caregivers who are sharing their lived experiences. Let's meet today's guest. For this episode, I'm joined by Riz Ali, founding attorney at Riz Injury Law, a law firm focusing on educating the injured on their rights. Riz, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Pooja.
This is exciting because we have not had a personal injury attorney on the show yet, and I don't think people always know what that means. So can you tell us a little bit about just what does it mean when you say you're a personal injury?
Absolutely. So it's broad, right? Injury is so many different aspects. You've got typical billboard guys, right? You've got the auto accidents. But beyond that, there's the work injuries, medical malpractice, nursing home abuse in this case. Even if a dog bites you, that's technically an injury that's actually possibly compensatable. Any type of injury where we can find the party who caused it, essentially, that's really where the case comes in, where the law comes in, is really any injury that happens where we can then get you compensation for. The key thing is that injury that is caused by the negligent effect or actions of another party.
Okay. So not like, but that's separate from like car accidents.
That's part of car accidents too.
Okay, car
so
accidents.
If you're driving down the road, you're following the rules. Somebody else is not following the rules. They're negligent. They're speeding, following too closely to avoid an accident. So now their negligent acts caused the accident, and you're the innocent party. And if they're insured, their insurance will cover your damages, injury bills, anything else.
Okay. And that would fall under personal injury.
Yes.
Technically.
Yes.
Okay. So you focus also on medical negligence.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that and like overall, what kind of cases are you looking at?
So I work with a number of different colleagues who are specialized in this area. And it's a broad field because medical negligence is, there's so much that's happening in hospitals these days in all kinds of ways that people are getting treatment. Oftentimes, the types of cases that we work with is, in addition to nursing home abuse, is anything at hospital. For instance, at the emergency room, you go in and you've got issues, but triage thinks your issue is not as emergent as it should be. While you're waiting, possibly your injury gets worse. And now you've got catastrophic effects from that. Of course, failure to diagnose. You go into a surgery and they catastrophically mess up. Unfortunately, there's those cases where the surgeons leave something
inside,
it's a lot of these catastrophic cases that are the real cases that get the attention, because litigating those medical malpractice is very, very costly and it's very time consuming. And the other thing is, we all love our doctors. We know they're very smart, they're very good. So when you're going in front of the jury, for them to really truly consider your case, the doctor really has to go beyond the standard of care for it to be a case that really warrants the jury to say, okay, we're going to hold this doctor liable. Because more often than not, people are like, the doctors do the best they can. Right. A lot of people also have this notion that if we're paying these doctors these, claims against them, their insurance is going to go up. So there's a lot of this thoughts that the jury has that go into really also the beginning process of, can we really win this case? Because the hospitals have crazy money. They're going to bring a handful of best attorneys to fight against plaintiffs' injuries like us. And one thing about injury law is that our fee is free to the client. It's contingency based, which means we don't charge the client. We simply take the case on, win the case, and when we win the case, we get a fee. And we also take on the cost for running that case. So I'd hate to say it, there's economics as well to choosing a case.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's why you decide which cases you take and which ones
Yep.
you don't. You
Yep.
need to make sure that there's enough proof, enough evidence
Totally.
to be able to even fight it. You know, I've definitely heard sometimes when people say like, that's not a winnable case, or you don't really have a case there.
Yep.
And, you know, and of course that's not in these catastrophic situations. They're more of like the minor situations. There was just this catastrophic case that came out of Canada, I think. I don't know if you saw, where there was a male patient who was in the emergency room with chest pain, and triage was like, okay, well, you need to wait. And they waited for, I think it was like 6 hours, and he ended up having a heart attack and dying. And the wife is suing.
She should.
Why
Yeah.
was someone with chest pain in triage for 6 hours as his chest pain was getting worse, right? And you think of these things, and you know, it's okay. I'm not a physician, but I've worked in trauma 1 centers for the last decade, so I know that chest pain is immediately a triage one, right? Like,
Yep.
you know that is something's wrong.
Yep, totally.
And so that's like a true case of that's
negligence, right? Them just really not doing their due diligence in following protocol.
And you know, it could be like, okay, well, staffing. Okay, well, it was really busy. Okay, well, fair. But that's a system level issue then.
Exactly.
And you still need to fix this.
Yep.
And someone still died.
Yep. The
Right.
client deserves the treatment that they came in for, period.
Yeah. One of the other terms that you used was medical malpractice. And of course, as a healthcare provider, we all have malpractice insurance. We are educated on malpractice, do no harm, we take an oath. Is there a difference between malpractice and negligence in legal terms?
Really? Negligence, malpractice, or accidents, depending on however you put it, it all goes to, in my opinion, to the same thing of what's the standard of care that was not followed. This is the protocol. The protocol was not followed, resulted in a catastrophic injury.
Okay.
So all terms really mean the same thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because I think, like, as a provider, when I hear those two terms, malpractice is like intentional,
Yeah.
almost, whereas negligence is like due to some factor, unfortunately, something happened.
Yep.
And it's still negligent on my part,
Yep.
but it wasn't intentional, right? Whereas I feel like malpractice is, in my head, something that's more intentional, like fraudulent activity, or recommending surgery when it's not warranted, or
Yeah.
recommending a medication because you're going to make money from it, right? Like those kind of things are malpractice in my eyes. Legally, you're saying there's really no difference.
Don't quote me, but I don't
Sure.
think so. I don't think so, because we treat malpractice negligence. Negligence is really the definition of malpractice in legal terms.
Okay,
Right?
sure.
Negligence is really a legal word, right? For the most part, when it's mentioned in that sense. So
Okay.
malpractice is a form of negligence.
Okay, yeah, I think that
Yeah.
really helps. Well, so then moving into our topic today, which is really focusing in on negligence and malpractice within our long-term care community
Yes.
environment, specifically in nursing homes. This is something that, as someone who has worked in hospitals for a very long time, and when we send patients to rehab or nursing homes, we unfortunately see a lot of it over the years. What is considered, or what are examples of negligence that you have seen in nursing homes?
So, first and foremost, Illinois is a state that has a standalone Illinois Home Care Act. Like that's how important it is, and the state prioritizes the rights of citizens who are in nursing homes to make sure they are taken care of. And the act specifically states that for a injury to be compensable, it has to have a physical harm, an injury that manifests into a physical harm that is compensable, where the damages are sufficient. In example sense, as you asked, common ones that are compensable, where it's like, okay, this is a case worth taking to the court and fighting against the other side, is bed sores, infections, falls, fractures, and worst case scenario, death. Those are really some of the common ones where we say it's like, okay, yeah, that's a case that we should take on. Definitely.
That makes sense. And, unfortunately, the reality is I have seen a lot of that in my decade.
I can only imagine.
So we'll often recommend rehab for someone. They go to a nursing home, they come back in a couple of weeks, and now they have a pressure injury. And I don't know that a lot of people know that is something that's not par for the course. Like that's not something that should be normalized, and that's not something that just comes with the territory of going to a nursing home, and that is negligent.
Yep. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
No, we can't advise them technically as providers to
Yep.
say like, hey, you should pursue this legal action.
Right. Yeah. They have to really kind of voluntarily realize, okay, something is off. And not just off, but make sure. I think one key thing is that when you're allowing or submitting or having your loved ones go into a nursing home, you think they're in good hands, but nobody loves your loved ones as much as you do, right? So you still have to take a proactive role in their life to make sure they are okay, to really check in with them, talk to them, and if something is not being dealt with, let the management know, let the nurse in charge know, or someone above them, or the overall manager of the nursing home, because this way it will get in the notes. That's very important, which we'll get to later.
Yeah, I can tell you all about documentation standards, but I think that's really important, but also that's assuming that people have family. And one of the most common times that I see these kind of things slip through the cracks is when people don't have those family members or advocates for them, right? Yeah. And I think that's a big part of it. I think one of the things that we can talk about is how frequently patients on Medicaid get converted to long-term care when we send them for rehab, and how often it's someone who falls through the crack because they don't have family to be like, hey, why are you staying there? Why didn't you come home?
Yep.
Or they don't have advocates that are saying, hey, you should go home. Gosh, I can't think of the term right now, but we have doctrines in Illinois that require community living, right? If
Yep.
someone doesn't need to be institutionalized,
Correct.
we don't institutionalize
That's
them.
right. Yep. It's their first and foremost choice.
Correct.
Yep.
And yet, we know this happens.
Yep.
Where
Once they see the money, it's like, hey, this is where we're doing.
Right,
Yeah,
where
it's
older
really.
adults end up going into a facility for rehab.
Yep.
And then end up staying there long
For
term.
much more longer time. Yeah. Unfortunately, I've heard of cases where you go in for rehab, just rehab, and then something catastrophic happens, and it's really sad. Really, really sad.
We can talk about how many times patients do fall. They fall at home, they come in to the hospital, they potentially fractured a hip, they get sent to what we call subacute rehab or short-term rehab,
Yep.
which is usually in a facility adjacent with a long-term care facility
Yep.
inside of a nursing home,
Yep.
right? Skilled nursing facility. There's usually two wings to skilled nursing facilities. There's a short-term rehab side and a long-term care
Yep.
side. So we send them to short-term rehab. They end up falling again, or they end up getting an infection. They come back to the hospital.
There
right?
you go. Yep.
We do this.
It's a
we
it's
do
a
the circle
cycle
again,
over
right?
and over.
We do this circle again. We send them back to rehab again because now they're even weaker than they were before, and now they're more injured and more sick than they were before. They go back to rehab, right?
Yep.
A few weeks later, they come back. They fell again. Now they have injured something else, right? And all of this long term, we just cut their life expectancy by years.
Dropped it radically.
Years.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Because had we been able to send that person home on that first time, none of the subsequent things would have happened.
Yep.
And of course, things can happen at home, right? I'm not saying homes are holy grail.
Right.
But the chances of her getting an infection or falling again in an institutionalized environment would have been much lower if we had been able to send that person home.
Exactly.
But that's just not possible a lot of times. Because people don't have the home support systems in place.
Yep.
They're at a higher risk of getting injured if they fall again, right? If
Yep.
they're on blood thinners,
Yep.
if they are off balance. They don't qualify for intensive rehab at a rehab hospital.
Yep.
They don't have anyone to take them to outpatient therapy, right? Like there's all these factors that go into why someone gets sent to rehab from our perspective.
Yeah.
Right? But unfortunately, these things happen at nursing homes. And, one of the things that I asked about is who's accountable and why is accountability so hard to enforce in nursing homes?
So it's a difficult question because first and foremost, oftentimes what's really considered a case is unfortunately something that's tragic where the loved one has passed away, for instance. So if your loved one's passed away and there's a negligence, we've got a case, right? When we file the case, right, that person is no longer there to speak on their behalf and what happened to them. So the people who are giving a testimony are the people who are being sued. So you know what kind of testimony that's going to be, number one. Number two, we as attorneys, we request medical records. Those records are probably whitewashed, unfortunately. Right? Or not as accurate. Some things are just not there. So who's accountable? First and foremost, you have to look at the structure of the home. Is it for profit? Right? Is it a government run? Okay. Is it a management company that's managing it? Okay. Who is that management company? Are they managing a bunch of different homes or just this home? Additionally, you want to look at, okay, the staff, the CNAs, do they work for the home or is it a third party where they're just contracted out and there's anyone coming and going really based on whatever the contractual agency has to provide staff-wise. So there's a number of layers to kind of figure out, okay, who's really in charge here? But you got to just follow the money, right? Who's getting paid, right? Of course, we do the search on, the Illinois Business Secretary of State website to see, okay, this is the entity, this is the company that owns the property. Sometimes there's different layers of who owns the property, who runs the facility, and then who provides the staffing, and it can be all of them. So when we file a lawsuit, first class that I had in law school, my professor said, when you have a case, sue everybody. Just everybody you can think of, because the law says you have X amount of time to file a lawsuit. So by putting everybody in the lawsuit, you've preserved the right to sue all of them. Because if you don't and the time runs out, you can't sue that person. Then, if they're not liable, they can easily prove, hey, this is me, I have no role, judge let me out, and the judge will grant that. So, in an effort to make everybody that's possibly related, add them all to the lawsuit.
What is that statute of limitations?
It really varies, but generally it's 2 years.
2 years since the initial incident or 2 years since gone out, it still dates back to the first incident.
Yeah, 2 years. That's what you got.
I think that's really important for people to know because I think, especially in nursing homes, if long-term care is involved, something happens and families are so involved in it, but they just are trying to fix the things that are happening, and all of a sudden now it's been a year and they're like, yes, we should have done this, or hey, maybe we should have looked into it, or all this stuff happens, people don't have the time to process it, and then the person dies, and now it's been 2 years, 3 years, and their family and their friends are saying, hey, that shouldn't have happened.
Could have been a case.
About suing?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, can we do it now? And it's like...
It's gone. Yeah.
So interesting. You mentioned notes, documentation. You said the documentations are not always complete or it doesn't always have the information you're looking for. Can you share what that means? What sort of information are you talking about when you say that?
We read medical records all the time for medical malpractice cases, personal injury, medical treatment cases, nursing home cases. The nursing home medical records almost kind of look like Chinese. They're not the typical records, right? It's a lot of lists. Right? Where they're given a list and it's like you check off, right?
I have to be honest, I've never seen a nursing home record, so I can't say what that looks like.
It's literally lists.
Okay.
More often than not, right? Because it goes back to the staffing issue. Oftentimes you have CNAs doing the job, right? And CNAs are not as well medically trained as a doctor. Right? So now, oftentimes, they're doing a bunch of tasks, and part of their job, I'm sure, is to notate whatever they do. However, they also have to run to the next patient, right? Because there's probably a call from another patient coming to go take care of them. So sometimes they may not accurately reflect what they exactly did on the records. right? So notes and records sometimes are not the most accurate. And that's why we recommend to the family that be involved in your loved one's life. If there's multiple, if there's aunts, uncles, brothers or sisters, grandkids, take roles. And if you see something off, listen, take questions, ask questions to your loved ones actively. How are you doing? Are they feeding you? Are you getting your medications on time? Are you sleeping okay? Are they bathing you? Are they shifting you around? And if that's not happening, or did anything happen, then to make sure, go there and tell the nurse that, or supervisor that's on shift, to make sure it gets on the notes, because we want that on the notes. Then if it happens again, you can be like, well, I was here a week ago or a month ago where the same thing happened and I told you and you notated it. Now it's happened again. So if there's a substantial injury from that same lack of care, now essentially you have something called notice, right? Now the nursing home staff, in their record, they have noticed this person, for instance, say, is a fall risk, right? They can't say we didn't know. It was already in your record. So if they fell and the injury, a catastrophic injury, God forbid, happens, now you at least have notice and they can't back their way out.
Right. And I think I guess I don't know how nursing homes operate, but at least in the hospital, like, we have algorithms in place, like things that notate in the chart when someone is at risk or at risk for falling. We do those assessments too when we work with them. We do similarly with like pressure injury risks. OTs do a lot of delirium risk assessments, right? Like, what are the safety concerns that patients are at risk for when they're in? That is a systematic process, and it should be from admission to stay. And so I don't know how that translates into nursing homes, but I would assume, and maybe I'm wrong in my assumption, but is there not usually like an EMR system in place where this stuff triggers?
There is an EMR system because everybody operates on EMR now. But question, any technology is as good as the person using it, right? And if there's a staff shortage, going back to kind of who's held accountable, you got to look at, okay, is the nursing home for profit? And a lot of these for-profit entities, the name says it. So the goal is to maximize profit for shareholders. The staffing is, there's the law, unfortunately, doesn't set a ratio of staffing, like to X patient to one staff, based on what I've read so far. Oftentimes, there's not enough staff, and that staff doesn't have time to usually notate every little thing they do or pay attention. Things are overlooked, unfortunately, because they are busy and they're running around taking care of so many patients. In most nursing homes, not all.
That's really interesting because I know in hospitals we have staffing ratios required, right, legally. And this just makes me question and wonder, are nursing homes just not as regulated as hospitals are? And what do those regulations?
There's definitely regulations set in play, like the Illinois Home Care Act, but it's not as strict as a hospital, because a hospital is a live, moving machine with a lot going on, and right?
Lots of liability.
Lots.
Yes.
So here is a much different structure. That's all I have so far on that topic. But the key is, I think, the sad part is there's a lot of these nursing home cases that are owned by these venture capitalist companies, and their goal is to provide minimum coverage, right? Business coverage, right? Cut corners where they can. And that's one of the things, if I were to enlist my loved one to a nursing home, I would be asking those questions. I would be asking, okay, who owns this? Take a look at the contract. Because most people just have a bad rap of nursing homes, unfortunately, nursing homes have gotten smarter to where when you sign the contract of having your loved ones go there, a lot of them have an arbitration clause. And that arbitration clause will say, well, in the case of a lawsuit, you don't get a jury trial. You have to arbitrate. And the arbitrators that they select are people who are used to seeing a lot of the same type of injury cases. So they may not have the emotional response to injuries as much as a jury would, right? Because they're just so used to it. That's an important thing to look at.
It is.
Please. Yes, you get jaded.
Yeah.
They get jaded. So they're like, okay, that's just another injury. Well, you signed up for it or par for course, Yes, there was negligent, but that sucks. It's bound to happen, right? Whereas the jury, that's a pool of 12 people from the citizens of the county you're in who really do look at it, I think, most non-biasedly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of this stuff, actually a lot of stuff should go through jury trials
Yes.
in general,
Yeah.
Legally. But especially in these cases, I have seen some awful arbitration clauses, I feel, in general. Because, at the end of the day, everyone's just CYA, right? Everyone's covering their own funds,
Yeah, exactly.
making sure that they don't get settled out of millions of dollars.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, things happen. And I think we talked about this a little earlier as accountability, but also, yes, there are regulations, but who's enforcing them, right? Of course, that's state dependent.
Yep. And that's
Very
where
state dependent.
that's another thing we say. If you have an issue, once you've notated it once or twice, let them know. Call the Illinois Department of Health. Report it, right? And then they'll do their due diligence. Please report it, because that's your best case to defend yourself, because now there's also an independent record of, hey, this happened and they're investigating it.
Yes. So if there's concerns, complaints, things you're noticing, Department of Health and the local state ombudsman.
Yes.
They are there to be the patient's voice, and they are there to truly speak and represent the patient.
Yep.
It's not about the family, it's not about the facility, it's not about the providers, it's truly to protect the patient, and they will go in and assess the situation, figure out from the patient what they need, and they will investigate if needed. And so I think it's important for people to know that there are people whose job it is to protect you.
Yes.
But they have to know that something's wrong.
Yep.
And so if you're not telling them, they have no way of intervening before something gets worse.
Yep.
And so I think it's really important for people to know that. And I think part of that goes back to what you were saying, is like families need to be more involved.
Yep.
What warning signs do families often overlook before there's a serious injury or neglect or abuse that happens?
Like I said, times just not listening to their loved one. That's really critical, number one. Number two, and one of the most common things that develop fast is bed sores. It doesn't take long for bed sores to develop. A few days, especially if you're someone who's really immobile, someone who's quadriplegic, paraplegic, right? You're not moving at all. So,
It's not eating.
exactly. If they're not turning you, if they're not actively proving, so those bed sores are going to develop fast.
Yep.
Fast. So, a key thing is listening to your loved ones, and if something happens once, twice, that's a big warning sign. Why did that happen again? That should definitely require a call to the Illinois Department of Health or the local ombudsman. Besides just checking in to see how your loved one is doing, I think let them be the voice. I understand sometimes our loved ones, they're at a point where sometimes they'll say things, right? They're just at that age. Sometimes we tend to dismiss our loved ones because they're like, oh, okay, you're just saying that because you're just not happy. Granted, but maybe there's something more to it. I think the biggest thing is really listening to them and realizing, are they actually getting the care? And then making sure you're proactive in following up, calling the right authorities, and getting it on record that, hey, this is what's going on with my loved one.
Yeah, I think that gets so much harder too when you have loved ones with cognitive declines. There are providers who are like, oh, well, that didn't happen. And you really don't have a way to corroborate that because your loved one has a cognitive impairment.
Yes.
And so it's even easier for them to fall through the cracks, because if something does happen and they do end up saying something about it, it can get dismissed because they can say, oh, well, that didn't happen. That's just their cognitive impairment talking.
Exactly.
And there are things in place to kind of validate that stuff, of course, but it's a matter of who's trained, how they're trained, and how much they follow those kind of trainings and stuff, as far as like identifying, okay, did this truly happen or not?
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Even with cognitive impairment.
Yep, totally. I totally second that.
Yeah, that part's really hard. I want to talk a little bit about the legal action side of that, because this is your bread and butter. What should families realistically expect if they decide to pursue legal action, and where does the system make justice harder than it should be? So sort of two questions, but related to each other.
Yeah, a couple of things. I want to answer your warning signs question one more time. So, in addition to talking to them, look at unexplained decline in weight loss, right?
Yes.
If they're really losing weight quickly, what's going on? Are they not being, you know what I mean, giving food on time? Is there a medication issue? A lot of times, if your complaints are not documented or they're just dismissed, right? If you are there and you're telling them, hey, this is what's going on, and they're just dismissing you, that's a warning sign that maybe they're just not doing their job and they're hoping you just go away. Another one is really just, like I said, isolation kind of goes back to talking to your loved ones, and then documentation, lastly. If they're not documenting, and you make sure something happens, and if not, call Department of Health.
Yeah. Going back to the documentation real quick before you get back into the legal action stuff. The 21st Century CARES Act requires access to patients to their notes now, right? It used to be where you had to call medical records, go to medical records, they would give you physical copies, you had to wait, all this
time.
But the CARES Act now requires that documentation is visible to patients through their charting login.
Chart login.
Right? And so, because I hear you say like, oh, we should be telling them to document, tell them to document, but how do you know that they're actually documenting it, right? If they're not doing it in front of you.
Right.
Because someone will say, I mean, I've done that before where I'll be like, yes, I'll document it, right? Have there been times where I've completely forgotten because now I'm charting 4 notes and I'm like,
Yeah.
shoot, I told them I would put this in the note and then I completely forgot, right?
Yep.
It happens.
Happens.
But if it's something that's that important and it gets left out or it doesn't get entered, the patient or the family, whoever has access to the records, can see that, oh, this wasn't documented. And they could bring it up the next day.
Exactly.
Again, and say, hey, I didn't see a record of this. I asked the nurse yesterday to put this in the chart. Okay, let's go back to the question about realistic expectations for pursuing legal action, and then what in the system makes it so much harder for these patients and their families to get the justice that they deserve.
So, system is slow. But thankfully, there is an exception to our loved ones elderly. If they are elderly and if there's really a lot of care needed, or if perhaps they're really at the end of their time, you can expedite the lawsuit. However, the defense is still going to put up a fight. Right? And we have to fight that. So as far as seeking legal action goes, the work really begins way before. By the time the lawsuit arises, a lot of it is done. Besides mainly getting an autopsy at the time of passing to make sure, I will say, if you do get an autopsy, get an independent autopsy that you pay for. That is the most biased autopsy you will get. If the facility does it.
You mean the most unbiased?
Yes. Unbiased. Yes, unbiased. Yes, truthful. Because this way, the first thing we'll look at, the first thing jury will look at, that's like the most objective thing is that autopsy. Number one. So get as much documentation as possible before something happens. First of all, don't think lawsuit. Think I just want to care for my loved one, right? And the way you care for this, taking interest, being there with them, taking as much interest as you can. And secondly, let's just say if they are active, right? If they are wanting to kind of go on, even if it's on a wheelchair, go out and, sit by the pond. If they can walk, if they can do some activities, go do those activities. Take pictures, take videos, have that record. Because when the time comes to defend your loved one, usually the defense is going to say the common objections, which is most of the time, loved ones don't go to a nursing home unless they're sick, right? There's something off, right? Usually there's some sort of comorbidity or something, right? So it's easy for defense to paint that, hey, they were already sick and this was just par for course. They had blood pressure, diabetes, and, cholesterol issue, whatever, list of things that are common, right, at that age. So, but you documenting perhaps, hey, no, they were active. It was this fall or this that caused them to be this, right? So that documentation is very important. I already discussed, the arbitration clause, right? If the contract has an arbitration clause, then you are really stuck with that from a legal standpoint. And then lastly, as soon as something does happen, lawyer first. Like really get a lawyer on, because a lot of times information, records, sometimes we can get to them really quick, right? Oftentimes because of staffing issues, some staff may be gone, right? So that's why getting a lawyer on board sooner than later is helpful, because then we can put them on notice to say, hey, don't do anything with any of the documentation. Preserve all this evidence. We'll find out on the records all these people that were taking care of your loved one. Issue as soon as possible subpoenas to all of them saying, I need to use deposition, because what if they move to another facility? Now we have difficulty tracking down evidence that could be helpful to the case.
Patients think that they have to wait until they have multiple things in a row in order before they reach out to a lawyer. The lawyer can probably do it a lot faster and make sure that things aren't getting deleted or thrown out or tampered with if word gets out that you're going to try and litigate this, right?
Yeah, exactly. So start sooner than later.
Yeah.
That's the biggest tip I can give.
I think we touched on staffing ratios, reimbursement structures, and ownership models. I do want to go into that reimbursement structures bit a little bit more. So from my understanding, nursing homes for long-term care, medical insurance doesn't cover it except for Medicaid. State Medicaid covers it. And then anyone outside of that, it's usually private pay.
Correct.
What are the disparities you've seen for nursing homes that are private pay, mostly private pay with a few Medicaid beds sometimes, or the ones that are predominant?
Honestly, in my experience thus far, there's issues on both sides. It's hard to say if one is worse than the other because we're getting cases on both sides. Unfortunately, there's really no real data that I've found that kind of measures if one is better over the other. So I don't have too much on that question for you, besides that injuries and these catastrophic injuries are happening across the board.
No, I think that's good, because I think oftentimes there's a misconception that government tells that there's issues on both ends.
The private ones are for profit,
right,
and oftentimes owned by conglomerates, and they're just as much about profit as government, who doesn't have as much money to spend, right?
Exactly.
Because it's a business.
Of the state or the federal government, right?
Yep.
And are there to make a profit. And so they want to spend as less money as possible. So on both ends, it's the same issue for two different reasons.
Yep.
And so what happens with that is impact to staffing, impact to standard and quality of care, impact to amenities or services that they have available, the difference in in-house versus contracted personnel and providers. In the rehab space, that's huge. Most nursing homes have contracted out with rehab companies, right? Rehab management companies.
Totally.
That get contracted by these nursing home management companies.
There you go.
It's just management to management, and there's not really an in-house
So
understanding.
the key people who are making the decisions are actually far removed from the patient, and oftentimes that's where the problem happens.
Absolutely.
Is that removal. If they were actually in-house, actively walking around the floor and then making decisions, I think it could save a lot of people. A lot of headaches, a lot of injuries.
Right?
Exactly.
It's always the upper management making all these decisions that trickle down that they have no idea about. But that's because they're just looking at the numbers.
The numbers, exactly. How many patients are there? What level are they at? What's the payout? And that's it.
And how many personnel do we...
what's the cost?
And what is that cost going to look like?
There you go.
Can we minimize that?
There you go.
And then that impacts the provider's quality of, I don't want to say it impacts provider quality of care, but it impacts provider satisfaction, provider turnover rates for sure, because in both situations there is limited to no raises, limited to no bonuses, limited PTO,
and
time off.
And overall support while you're working, because everybody else is busy.
That could be a whole nother conversation on staff support. But at the end of the day, it trickles down to poor care because the staff is burned out. There's not enough support in place. There's not enough money to go around. And in for-profit cases, there is. They just don't want to spend it.
They don't want to spend it, exactly.
So you have a loss on both sides.
And unfortunately, losses to the people, the loved ones, the person. The families. Yeah. That's the really sad part.
Do you have a very strong example of a case that was cut and dry that you can talk about versus a case that was very borderline that you still ended up, or you've heard still going through? Ones that you can talk about.
So we recently had a case, and unfortunately we learned it was no longer a case, but their loved ones passed away. What seemed like could have been some sort of a altercation between the staff and the loved one who's deceased, and they did get a autopsy, and unfortunately it also yielded that there was no foul play, but the family fully believes there was some sort of foul play that led to their death. Unfortunately, that was really a difficult one to say. It's difficult to fight this one for you, even though we really do feel for the family.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the independent autopsy showed that there was no
There
foul
was
play.
no foul play. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard too because then there's the other side of our society where there's definitely people who are just trying to litigate for the sake of litigating.
Yes.
Because they want some money out of it.
Exactly.
And so it gets really hard because you're like, I want to believe you, but
Yep.
there's also a lot of bad actors
Right.
out there.
And on the note of litigation, so one thing the jury looks at, something interesting, is if the children of the loved one or there's family members who have sufficient resources to be able to provide for them at home, they're like, well, why did you send them to a nursing home? So it's interesting because the jury is all that is going to be put up in front of the jury. So sometimes jury doesn't look at that as favorably.
I think that's so interesting because there are so many reasons why people end up in nursing homes, even if the kids have the financial resources.
Yes.
Right? I think there's a lot of layers to that question
Yes.
or that situation. It could be that they don't have a good relationship.
Correct.
But they still care about them.
Yep.
It could be that they live in different states and they don't want to move.
Yep.
It could be they just simply don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to, or the training and the skills to care for that
Yep.
person.
Yep.
And so they'd rather pay for a nursing
Nursing
home
home,
versus
who
a
is
home.
proficient, professional, and be
Correct,
taken
trained.
care of. Yeah.
So that is a really hard argument to hold up because how can you assume that?
I know. The jury's wild. They have sometimes a jury has the most unpredictable biases that lead to outcomes.
Well, and I can see that, right? Culturally, I mean, in our
Yeah.
culture, we see it all the time. God forbid
Yes.
you put a parent.
You will be
into a
shamed for
facility.
life. They will
you're
never
going to
let
be
you forget it.
Shamed and like thrown out of society.
Yes.
It's a really bad thing to do.
Yep, yep.
And I think a lot of that stems from, of course, in our end, cultural expectations and obligations, regardless of financial support.
Exactly. Yep. You're to
or
take care of them
stability.
for life.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I think that prevails across other cultures as well, for sure. But, the work I do is trying to make sure that families understand if they have the capacity, the capability, the training, and the resources to be able to care for their parents at
Yep.
home. And a lot of times that answer is no.
No.
And so if that's the answer, then what's the alternative?
Nursing home.
And is
Yep.
it that you're going to hire 24-hour care? Does that make it easier or does that add burden? Because you still have to manage that staff
Yep.
and manage that home and pay those bills
Yep.
and do all of that.
Yep.
Or would it be easier and more cost effective to go into a facility of some sort where it's one bill and everything's covered and you don't have
Totally.
but you do still have to keep an eye on the family member, like
Yes.
you're saying. You just don't have to manage the staff, which
Yep.
is a lot of work.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
for someone who oftentimes a lot of these family caregivers end up, they're sandwiched, right? Either
Yep.
with kids and older adults or work and older adults, right? Careers are in their primes and their 40s
Yep.
and 50s, and their parents are in their 70s and 80s needing support as well. And so it's like you physically can't manage a second household.
You can't. Yeah, it's a lot because you've got your own careers. Everybody's busy. Oftentimes you have your own kids, right, who need their attention. So it's tough. It's a
Yeah.
really tough question, and it's really fact to situation to situation, family to
Yeah.
family basis.
And that's where it really matters who the jury is, right?
Exactly.
I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's good for families to know that you should be prepared for an answer for that
Definitely.
if this is something
If-
that's going to come up.
Exactly. Yes. That's the main reason I mention it.
Yeah. Is there one that was so clear cut and dry that you're like, this is an easy one?
Yeah, someone going in for just a couple of months rehab and then perfectly mobile, perfectly fine, and they pass away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they become bedbound.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've seen that a lot. Like,
Yeah.
we'll send someone to rehab and they're like, they're just a little wobbly. They just need a little bit of rehab so that
Yep.
they can, because they live alone and they don't really have
Exactly.
a support system.
Yep.
And then they come back like a month later and they're like, they can't even walk.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Opposite of what we were expecting.
Right. Like,
We
you
were
were supposed to
expecting
rehab them to be able to go home.
Exactly. And now they're more dependent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think this is really one of those situations where it's like, this is such a necessity in our society, which I don't know, I think maybe we can argue against, but it's such a prevalent industry in society, and yet it's one that has a really bad reputation and still has really bad cases of medical negligence and malpractice.
Yes.
And fraudulent behaviors. And I think it's really hard when we're trying to address caregiving and long-term care, and the options are just so terrible. It's like a bad option or a worse option.
Yeah, it's tough. That's just where, as a family, you have to figure out what's the best for you, and it's tough because you have your life, you've got your kids, and you've got your loved ones, right? And I think that's where families should just come together. It's really important as family to come together and figure out, okay, what is everybody willing to do to make their fair part, and then what's best for the loved one.
Yeah, and what does the loved one want?
What does a loved one want? Sometimes a loved one wants to just be at home. Okay, that's difficult. What can we do to make that happen? Because oftentimes they don't want to go to a nursing home.
Well,
they just don't.
Yeah, the statistic is 60% of older adults want to die at home.
Exactly, yeah.
60 or maybe even 80.
Yeah.
It might be 80%, but over half of them have no idea how they're going to do that.
Correct. It affects their ego, their sense of well-being, a sense of just being, because now essentially your dignity is being taken away. And all of that you have is now in this one room with the bathroom right next to it. Can you imagine that? Going all your life, right? As a kid, you're taught to be on your own. And at 18, you're on your own, right?
Yeah.
And now you've lived 40 years, 50 years of this amazing life, right? And now you're subjected to this small space. So you have to kind of think about how that feels. I am already thinking, like, God, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, and you're thinking about, like, most of these places, they don't have a kitchen. You can't have a car.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
There's no independence with that.
And a lot of our loved ones who are now going into nursing home, they're so used to cooking. That was part of their life, unlike our, the new modern trend. So to not be able to cook that's a big takeaway. Even for me, if I can cook, I'd be like, oof, that's rough.
Well, you need at least like a kitchenette, right?
Exactly.
Like something to be able to put something together. These nursing homes don't even have that in their rooms. I do want to talk real quick about how this translates to also other types of supportive living communities, right? So do you have experience with like assisted living facilities as well, and how those operate in comparison to skilled nursing facilities?
We get all kinds of cases, and issues are all across all the board. Some are better than others. It's really a facility by facility basis, not necessarily broken down versus a nursing home versus assisted living. We see issues across all across the board, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and because like when we talk about regulations, it just gets less and less regulated as you go to like the supportive living communities, right? So like hospital to rehab hospital to short-term rehab to nursing home level of care to assisted living to independent living. I mean, the regulations just go down.
And from a lawyer's perspective, it's like generally the law is really good at predicting what's going to happen. But the more you narrow it down, the harder it is for them to make statutes and rules, right? Because it's hard to predict in a specific niche scenario what's going to happen and how to protect both parties. So that's why those restrictions are less and less and less.
Yeah. Well, and it's because individuals also have more and more independence in those less and less supportive communities. And
Correct.
So then the liability goes down too, right?
Exactly.
So how can they create regulations when the liability is not all theirs?
All theirs, exactly. Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to share that you want like families to know about when it comes to medical negligence or like pursuing legal action or just even understanding their rights when it comes to long-term care and nursing homes?
First and foremost, nursing homes are they serve a really important part for our society and our loved ones. The point of this is not how can we sue them. The point of this is that how can we most protect our loved ones so they don't get injured. So if you are, in this journey, key thing is take those notes. take an interest, have recordings, let the staff know what's going on, what changes you see, and report it to the right authorities, Ombudsman, Illinois Department of Health. And then, there's some things that really are out of our control, right? Because they are going into a facility where there's a lot that is in the staff's hand, right? But if you are willing to be a mediator for your loved one, you can usually decrease hopefully the injury. Because oftentimes it's kind of human nature. If you're being supervised, you're more likely to be better. So, right, if the people at the staff know that, hey, this room 201 here, the loved ones really care. They're visiting weekly basis. Somebody's here. Somebody's calling every day. You better make sure you're good, or else something happens. They're gonna know, right? So think about it, right? You're bound to, right?
Yeah, I can compare. Even in the hospital, we definitely get heads up from the nurses when there's family at bedside, when there's family very involved, when there's family that's overbearing, when there's family that is not helpful.
So you do your due diligence to make sure you're the best. You bring your best foot forward.
Know, like, okay, is this family going to be involved, or is this family potentially not going to be helpful? Or can we send them home with this family, or are we going to be concerned about their safety because the family's not very involved here?
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. So, and the key thing is, if minor things, unfortunately, the law doesn't protect, right? If small things are happening, certainly report it. But a lot of times people call us and saying, well, this happened. They didn't feed them on time, or things like that. It's like, well, I'm sorry, that does suck. But unfortunately, the law says it has to be something that manifests into a physical injury for it to be an actual claim worthy of filing a lawsuit against the other party. So that's where we say, just keep an eye on your loved ones, be there for them, be proactive in their lives, and if something happens that is catastrophic, that's where we step in.
I think this was super helpful. Thank you so much for coming on the show and joining me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Yeah, if you need me, you can find my website at rizinjurylaw.com. If you're on social media, you can find Lawyer with Riz, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, any of those platforms. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Aging Together podcast. If today's conversation helped you, please follow the show, share it with a friend, or leave a quick rating or review. Your support keeps this podcast free, ad light, and growing. Until next time, let's keep learning and aging together. Take care.